This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
According to local sources in the province of Abyan in southern Yemen, several people were killed and injured during clashes between security forces and members of the political mobilization forces in the province.
Clashes erupted after more than 7,000 people held a demonstration demanding the release of the detainees.
Yemeni authorities imposed a security curfew in the area where the demonstration took place and on the entrances of Zinjibar city, where the demonstration was held.
Al Jazeera correspondent Murad Hashim from Sana'a reports on the recent developments in Yemen during the past few months.
The city of Zinjibar, the capital of the Abyan province of southern Yemen, has witnessed one of its worst days. Today started with strict security measures to prevent a demonstration that was called for by members of the political mobilization forces in South Yemen, despite the refusal of local authorities to grant organizers a permit. Dozens of armed men who participated in the demonstration turned it into armed clashes with security forces. The two sides have blamed one another for causing these clashes. The violent clashes lasted for hours, during which light and medium weapons were used, killing and injuring people from both sides. These clashes might be a turning point for the political mobilization forces in the south of Yemen because they may resort to the use of violence. The two sides have been trying to avoid being dragged into a civil war. The clashes were not expected, though the two sides were preparing for them amidst an atmosphere of tension and polarization. The two sides have organized political activities at the same time. One was organized by the government to condemn what it calls hatred and separatism. Another activity was organized by the political mobilization forces in the south, calling for the severing of ties between the north and south of Yemen. Murad Hashim, Al Jazeera, Sana'a.
Al Jazeera's bureau chief stays with us from Sana'a. Murad, have the clashes in Zinjibar ended?
The situation is still tense. There are sporadic clashes and sounds of gunshots can still be heard once in a while around the city. Limited clashes took place in the city of Zinjibar as the Yemeni authorities sent more security forces into the city. Some members of the Southern Mobilization Forces confronted them. According to local sources, 8 members from the Southern Mobilization Movement were killed and dozens of others were injured. 2 security officers were killed and dozens more were injured, including a security commander in the city. These numbers were not confirmed by official sources or by the Southern Mobilization Forces. The city is still subjected to special security measures. A strict security perimeter was imposed around the city of Zinjibar, and people are no longer going out into the streets. 1 hour and a half ago, smoke was billowing out of the home of Sheikh Tariq al-Kabi. He'd called for this demonstration in defiance of local authorities who wanted him to first submit for an application for a permit, and second, they were concerned about the objectives of this demonstration, which was regarded as unconstitutional because it threatened the national unity of the country.
U.S. Secretary of Defense Robert Gates is planning to visit Israel for a few hours on Monday. Gates is likely to discuss Iran's nuclear issue and bilateral strategic relations. Leading the delegation, which will include Dennis Ross, is U.S. National Security Advisor General James Jones, who is scheduled to visit Israel on Tuesday as well. These U.S. diplomatic maneuvers coincided with a rise in tension between Israel and the U.S. Israeli researchers say that the U.S. and Israel are headed towards what they refer to as a political collision due to the stumbling peace process with the Palestinians and Syria.
الرئيس الأمريكي باراك أوباما كان اعتبر وما يزال أن حل الدولتين يقضي
U.S. President Barack Obama believes that the two-state solution requires both Palestinians and the Israelis to work towards fulfilling their obligations. Obama called on Israel to freeze the construction of settlements, including those referred to as natural growth. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejected Obama's demand for a settlement freeze, saying that it was unreasonable. Netanyahu said that freezing settlements means freezing life. Experts with the Institute for National Security Studies of the Tel Aviv University said in their annual report that neither the conditional acceptance of Netanyahu for the creation of a Palestinian state, nor the partial understanding between Israel and Washington on Iran's nuclear program is enough to prevent a possible collision between the two countries. In order to avoid a confrontation with Washington, which may have serious strategic consequences for Israel, national security experts called on the Israeli government to launch a special initiative. The experts further said that Netanyahu's idea of economic peace is not a practical solution. Amidst the sharp variation in positions over the issue of the settlement freeze and amidst consensus over the Iranian nuclear program, the new U.S. policy is being tested in the region. U.S. Middle East envoy George Mitchell is expected to arrive in Israel and Ramallah next Sunday. Mitchell will hold talks with Israeli and Palestinian officials. On Monday, the U.S. Secretary of Defense will embark on a brief visit to Israel for talks on the Iranian nuclear program and bilateral strategic relations. Meanwhile, U.S. National Security Advisor General James Jones, accompanied by Dennis Ross, will visit the region on Tuesday for the same reason. This news comes after the U.S. Air Force Secretary General Norton Schwartz wrapped up a business visit to Israel. During the visit, Schwartz discussed the strategic situation in the region, as well as ways to strengthen military cooperation with Israel. Ramzi Al-Mazri, Al-Arabiya.
ومعنا من القدس المحلل السياسي شلومو غانور. شلومو
Joining us from Jerusalem, political analyst Shlomo Ganor. Shlomo, do American officials in Israel separate between the issue of the Iranian nuclear program and peace in the Middle East?
هل يمكن القول بأنه ربما يكون رد أمريكي ضمني على ما كان
Can we say that this is an implied American response to Netanyahu's comments in which he linked the peace process and the Iranian nuclear file?
أعتقد بأن وصول جميع هؤلاء المسؤولين الأمريكيين إلى هنا.
I think that the arrival of most of these American officials to Israel shows American solidarity with Israel and that the United States and Israel have identical visions when it comes to the Iranian threat. Iran's threat is not excluded to Israel, but it also threatens Middle East security. Therefore, the strategic dialogue will cover all issues and it will include most senior officials.
وعلى أعلى المستويات التي ستتم في الأسبوع.
شلومو عذرا عن أي تطابق تتحدث خاصة فيما
What identical visions are you talking about pertaining to Iran? We have listened to the head of the Israeli intelligence commenting on Clinton's statements, in which he said that she will give cover to her allies if Iran should obtain nuclear weapons. Israelis believe that these comments mean that the U.S. will allow Iran to acquire nuclear weapons. What is the similarity in American-Israeli visions?
نعم هناك تحفظ إسرائيلي من إمكانية تسليم.
Yes, Israel has some reservations that the United States may give into the possibility that Iran may acquire nuclear capability. However, even if the United States gives in and sees this as a current reality, then the United States and Israel will talk about this by the end of this year. American officials, including President Obama and other officials, said that any country has the right to defend its national security and interests. This shows similarities of visions.
Excuse me, but these statements generated controversy. Some considered them as a green light that Israel can hit Iran, but Biden discouraged this and said that this would affect the stability in the region. Let me talk about the peace process. If the U.S. and Israel do not agree on Iran, what about the settlements?
لم يكن هناك تطابق فيما يتعلق بالمواقف الإيرانية. ماذا عن العملية السلمية والاستيطان؟ يعني حتى
Some say that the honeymoon between the US and Israel has ended.
المتحدة وإسرائيل قد انتهى وولى.
لا نعتقد ذلك هنا في إسرائيل لأنه هناك تباين وهذا لا يمكن نفيه.
We in Israel do not think so. Yes, there are differences of views and we cannot deny that. However, efforts continue and perhaps Israeli officials have arrived to an agreement with the American envoy to the Middle East, George Mitchell. Perhaps the United States will agree that Israel keeps the settlement projects that have already been started in the West Bank in return for not starting new settlement projects. This is indeed what the Israeli government has been doing.
Why was the Israeli ambassador to the US summoned?
This was in relation to settlement issue in East Jerusalem. We must acknowledge that there are ongoing differences between different American administrations and Israeli governments since 1967 about settlements. However, the American administration says that the fate of the settlements in the West Bank will be determined by future negotiations between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. Therefore, Mitchell will convince the Palestinian and Israeli sides that they should resume negotiations while postponing stalled issues. What is important is resuming the peace process after 7 months of stalemate.
الشروط تبقى ذاتها والالتزام بخارطة الطريق يحدد العودة.
Our demands are unequivocal, and the roadmap for peace is the basis for resuming the negotiations with Israel. In this context, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas reiterated his demands for resuming talks with Israel. Abbas further said that Israel must halt its settlement campaign before any negotiations could resume. During a meeting with Russia's Middle East envoy Alexander Sulatnov in Ramallah, Abbas called on Tel Aviv to dismantle the illegal separation wall.
The main issue is for Israel to halt completely its settlement activities, including the so-called natural growth ones. Israel must recognize the two-state solution and without any conditions that may strip the Palestinian state of its political existence. The separation wall must be dismantled. The wall and the settlements are illegal.
شروط فلسطينية مرفوضة جملة وتفصيلا في القاموس الإسرائيلي موقف صارع رئيس الحكومة الإسرائيلية.
These Palestinian demands were rejected entirely by Israel. Speaking from the podium of the Israeli Knesset, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the separation wall will not be dismantled because it helps to bring security and calm to Israel. Netanyahu's comments come in response to U.S. demands calling on Tel Aviv to dismantle the separation wall due to security improvements, as was reported by Israeli news services in the past few days.
على خلفية تحسن الأوضاع الأمنية بين الطرفين. ومن القدس المحتلة انضم إلينا جمال جمعة منسق اللجنة الشعبية لمناهضة الجدار.
Joining us from occupied Jerusalem is Jamal, coordinator of the Popular Committees Against the Wall and Settlements. Mr. Jamal, this is not a new Israeli position. What is Netanyahu trying to accomplish by reiterating his position, especially in light of the latest U.S. pressure on him?
It's very clear that Netanyahu is trying to hold on to his government. If Netanyahu is to concede 1 inch, it will cost him dearly, meaning he will lose all the support he received during the elections. He came on top of an extreme right government with the support of the right-wing Israeli public. Consequently, we don't expect that Netanyahu will concede 1 inch. We, as popular committees, praise the position adopted by President Abu Mazen, who called on dismantling the separation wall. We also call on the implementation of the Hague Resolution. Practically, the International Court of Justice and not Netanyahu is the actual judge presiding over the case.
Jamal, the U.S. mounted pressure on Israel to dismantle the separation wall due to security improvements, as admitted by Israel. Is this an effective bargaining chip that can be used on the ground?
I believe that the Palestinians have met all their obligations regarding the roadmap for peace. On the other hand, the consecutive governments of the occupation have not fulfilled any of their obligations regarding the Oslo Accord or the roadmap for peace. The US, the EU, and the international community must force Israel to abide by these agreements, which are backed by international guarantees. This is what we must push for as Palestinians. As we continue to abide by these agreements, Israel continues to expand its settlement campaign. We as Palestinians are not gaining anything from these agreements. It's quite the contrary. The Palestinians and the Arabs are facing mounting pressure to offer more concessions. This is not acceptable and it's not fair. We as Palestinians and Arabs must take steps forward regarding this matter. We shouldn't only wait for US reactions.
Israel says it has called off tests of its Arrow anti-missile system in the US due to last-minute technical problems. A target missile was already in the air when the Israelis decided to stop the test. Pentagon says the parameters for the launch of the Arrow missile interceptor were not met, and so the launch was aborted. Israel's Arrow interceptor project was launched 2 decades ago in April. Tel Aviv claimed it had successfully tested the system in Israel. The Arrow project is half funded by the US. Well, Israeli Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman has not received the response he was looking for from Brazil with regards to Iran. In a joint news conference with President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva and Foreign Minister Celso Amorim, Lieberman said Brazil should pressure Tehran to abandon its nuclear program. In response, Amorim made it very clear Brazil does not plan to change its stance toward Iran. Brazil defended Iran's goal for nuclear development and even took a swipe at Israel's own nuclear activity. Brazil has called for a Middle East free of nuclear weapons and said all countries should sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Israel is the only military nuclear power in the Middle East, but Tel Aviv has so far refused to join the NPT. The US is allegedly working to avoid past mistakes that allowed Taliban members to flee Afghanistan and find safe havens in Pakistan. US envoy Richard Holbrooke has said Washington plans to improve coordination with Pakistan to avoid repeats of its grievous mistake. He has said coordination between the Afghan and Pakistani armies was another key issue. Holbrooke has admitted that the US ignored the consequences in Afghanistan when its military launched an offensive against the Taliban in 2001. His comments come as Islamabad expresses concern over US military action in Afghanistan that continue to push the militants into Pakistan. Polls have opened early for some in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. Security forces and medical professionals are being given the chance to cast their votes early so that they will be available for service on election day.
Voting in the parliamentary elections for the Kurdistan region of Iraq began on Thursday for 120,000 members of the military, police, and other essential services. The rest of the electorate is set to vote on Saturday, with campaigning officially finishing Thursday. In the Kurdish capital Erbil, there has been little of the violence that has marred the run-up to voting in the neighboring province of Sulaymaniyah. The authorities are having the security services vote early so that they may be deployed across the north of Iraq on the day of the polls. The vote, the second since the US-led war in 2003, has been proceeding peacefully around Kurdistan, with high turnout from those eligible being reported at polling centers.
So far, nothing untoward has happened and everything is proceeding as planned. Members of the police and security department are coming and voting. There's been no violence or other points of concern. Many people have been arriving to vote.
Currently, the 111-seat parliament is dominated by a coalition between Jalal Talabani's Patriotic Union of Kurdistan and Masoud Barzani's Democratic Party of Kurdistan. But the government is facing its most serious opposition from a former Talabani deputy who established a counterweight to the established parties known as the Change List. Even with the opposition having mounted a strong challenge in Sulaymaniyah, the sitting government is expected to retain power. Nevertheless, there have been fears that the violence might erupt between the two camps during voting.
Today's voting is an essential part of the election as it is reserved for police officers, doctors, paramedics, traffic officers, and security guards. A large number of people have turned out to vote and there have not been any problems. Security is tight and there is little risk of violence.
Friday will be a day between the 2 days of polling during which Kurdistan will prepare for the rest of the electorate to cast their votes, either for the government or one of the 22 opposition parties it is facing. Today's voting may be proceeding smoothly, but the real test will come on Sunday when the general populace goes to the polls. Benjamin Trigona-Harani, Press TV, Arabiya.
In an outstanding achievement and based on intelligence gathering, the Iraqi security agencies in the Anbar province announced the arrests of 90 wanted terror suspects affiliated with Al-Qaeda.
Al-Anbar's security leaders confirmed that the detained terrorists have been implicated in the latest bombing attack in the province.
Iraq's gangs of terror are gasping for air after they were placed in a chokehold position by the Iraqi security forces. The Iraqi army has stepped up its assault on the terrorists who are continuing to target Iraqi civilians. Al-Anbar's chief of police announced the arrest of 90 wanted terror suspects affiliated with Al-Qaeda. The chief further said that the suspects had arrest warrants issued against them after reportedly taking part in the latest terrorist attack on a local restaurant in Al-Anbar province.
The terrorists are definitely feeling the heat as the Iraqi police and emergency response teams continue to step up their military attacks, which in turn prompted the terrorists to escalate their campaign of retaliatory bombings. Today's suicide bomb attack targeted a secluded restaurant outside Ramadi's city limits. The restaurant is privately owned by a local resident.
2 civilians were martyred and more than 12 others were wounded in the criminal attack in which 2 booby-trapped cars were detonated. Most of the victims were workers and commuters who were on their way to work.
We strongly condemn this criminal act. We are ready to fight the elements of Al-Qaeda and those supporting them. We would like to express support to the security forces and police command centers.
Tribal leaders expressed support and solidarity with members of the police and security forces and denounced all acts of terrorism.
Thank God the terrorists will never achieve their goal due to police vigilance. Yes, police vigilance.
The capability of the Iraqi security forces and the support of tribal leaders and tribesmen in Al-Anbar have helped achieve the desired security and stability in the province. This is very important, especially after the agreement on the withdrawal of foreign forces from Iraq is implemented. Ayat Saleh, Iraqiya.
The head of the National Command Center in the Iraqi Ministry of Interior, Major General Abdul Karim Khalaf, said that 6 convicted criminals have been sentenced to death by an Iraqi special court. The 6 were found guilty of kidnapping and killing a 4-year-old Iraqi boy. Khalaf further said that a band of currency counterfeiters was arrested in Baghdad by the Criminal Investigative Division inside the Ministry of Interior. He added that they have seized equipment and computers used in the production of counterfeit notes. The Iraqi police also seized more than 250 million Iraqi dinars in counterfeit bills. They also seized an unspecified amount of counterfeit bills under print.
The child's name is Jasim Muhammad Munib. He was abducted by a criminal gang of 6, and their names are Ali Hamoud Sghayr, Sabah Al-Radi, Rasul Mukhallif Shalloob, Muhammad Fayez, Hussam Saddiq, and Haidar Jawad. After a week of investigation, the criminals were transferred to a special court where they received death sentences by hanging. As the criminals await their execution, let it be a lesson for anyone trying to commit a heinous crime against innocent children or others.
حتى الجياد العربية الأصيلة
Even pure Arabian horses were not spared by the American occupation of Iraq. They were displaced and stolen. The horses that remain are neglected. One of these horses once carried the former President Saddam Hussein in military parades. My colleague, Tammam Hamid, prepared the following investigative report.
هذا الجواد العربي الأصيل هو آخر السالمين من عائلة نسر العبور. الحصان الذي حمل الرئيس العراقي.
This horse is the last saved horse of the Al-Ubur line. This is the horse that carried former President Saddam Hussein in most of the Iraqi army parades in 1988. The name of this horse is Ubur, and it is one of the 70 pure Arabian horses that were the property of the Iraqi government until 2003. In 2003, when Iraq was invaded, these pure Arabian horses were hidden in this area only to be subjected to abuse and theft. The Iraqi Organization for Pure Arabian Horses came and took control of the remaining horses. 1 month after the raid, a small force of the American occupation contributed in the search for these horses, which were found in the remote area of Al-Iraqiya in western Baghdad. However, 54 horses are still missing, and it is believed that some were smuggled outside the country.
منها 54 رأسا هرب بعضها إلى خارج البلاد.
أول ما جبناها الجيش الأمريكي عرض علينا يعني كانت الوضعية
In May 2003, the American Army offered us $50 million for 16 horses, but we refused to let the Americans take them. They made a few efforts to take the horses, but their efforts failed.
The Iraqi Organization for Pure Arabian Horses was only able to retrieve a small number of these horses. The organization has been suffering from lack of funds, which was reflected in its inability to continue the search for the lost horses.
Of course, we need the support of the government. The previous government used to support us, but the current government does not help us.
مشاهد سباق الخيول والمراهنات عليها تبدو طبيعية، لكن المختلف
These horse races and gambling seem to be normal, but what's different is the fact that most of the participating horses are not pure Arabian horses. There are only 650 pure Arabian horses in Iraq now, though at one point there were more than 2,000. The country hasn't imported horses since 1985.
أما السنوات التي تلت ذلك فقد أفقدت الحصان العربي الأصيل.
Arabian horses have been neglected since then, despite their symbolic significance, which is displayed in Iraqi statues and coins. Tamam Abdul Hamad, New TV, Baghdad.
Get more news about the Middle East online at linktv.org/Mosaic. The Mosaic webpage offers a complete archive of Mosaic programs, program transcripts, the Mosaic video podcast, and the Mosaic Intelligence Report, a weekly analysis of the hottest stories from the Middle East. The views expressed on Mosaic are those of the participating broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible with the support of viewers like you. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. network dedicated to global and national news, uncompromising documentaries, and diverse cultural programs, programs which connect you to the world.